It was about 10 in the morning on a Saturday, and I was walking past the sidewalk coffee shop on Larimer Street with grease still on my hands and a dark streak down one shoulder of my shirt. I hadn't planned on stopping. Then Joanna called out from a table outside, right there on the sidewalk. "Nathan, come sit down." She was there with Ellie, her latte still steaming. I pulled out a chair and sat. Before I could get a word out, Ellie climbed off her seat, ran straight at me, wrapped her small arms around my neck, and whispered into my ear, "Daddy." Joanna went still. I went still. Neither of us knew yet that one word from a 2-year-old had just told the truth more plainly than either of us had ever dared to. My name is Nathan Cord. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a mechanic at a small garage off Colfax Avenue in Denver, Colorado. I wasn't always a mechanic. I have a degree in mechanical engineering, and for years I worked as a technical supervisor for a large auto parts company on the edge of the city, the kind of job with a badge and a parking spot with my name on it. 3 years ago, my whole department got eliminated in a company-wide restructuring, and just like that, the badge and the parking spot were gone too. I bought into a small corner of a garage owned by a man named Terrence, 65 years old, gruff and generous in equal measure, who needed someone to eventually take the place over when his hands finally gave out. I started again from the ground up, working with my own 2 hands instead of a spreadsheet. It wasn't because I'd romanticized starting over. It was because I needed something I could actually touch, something with bolts and torque specs and a clear right answer, during a stretch of life when everything else felt like it was quietly coming apart at the seams. That stretch of life was my marriage to Cassandra. We got married when I was 28. Cassandra was 26. Sharp and decisive, always certain of what she wanted before I'd even finished asking the question. For the first 4 years, I believed we wanted the same things. We didn't. There was no big blow-up, no betrayal, no single moment I could point to and say that's where it broke. Just 2 people slowly realizing they were living parallel to each other instead of actually together, sharing a roof, but not much else. The divorce, when it finally came, was clean. No kids to fight over, no property battles, no bitterness that dragged on for years the way I'd heard it could. Just signatures on a page, a brief handshake in a lawyer's office, and 2 people walking off in different directions like nothing had ever tied us together at all. I kept the espresso machine, not because it meant anything special to me, just because every morning I needed something to do with my hands before I walked out the door, some small ritual to anchor the day before the day actually started. I'd make a latte, sit alone at the small table in my west-facing apartment, watch the morning light climb slowly across the wall, and tell myself I was getting used to the quiet. Eventually, I convinced myself I actually had gotten used to it. I was wrong, though it would take a while before I understood exactly how wrong. Marcus Weil had been my closest friend since college. We studied engineering together, split a cramped 2-bedroom apartment for 2 years, and once drove clear across Colorado on a trip we hadn't planned at all, back when we were 23 and thought we had all the time in the world. The kind of friendship you assume, without ever really examining it, will simply never change. Marcus married a woman named Joanna during the last stretch of my own marriage to Cassandra. I met her a handful of times at group get-togethers. Back then, cookouts, holiday parties, the usual rotation. My impression of her at the time was simple, quiet, more of a watcher than a talker. Always the last one still at the table because she was clearing plates nobody had asked her to clear. The kind of person you don't notice right away in a crowded room, but once you do notice her, you find you can't quite stop. They had a daughter, Ellie, when Joanna was 28. I never knew exactly when things started cracking between Marcus and Joanna. All I knew was that Marcus was suddenly busy with work more and more, home less and less, and then one day he called me and said, flatly, like he was reading off a weather report, "Joanna and I are done." His voice was so even that I didn't know how to respond. I asked him why. He said, "We just don't fit anymore." I believed him completely. At the time, I had no reason not to. The first time I saw Joanna again after the divorce was at a late summer barbecue at a mutual friend's house, the kind with a cooler full of ice and somebody's dog running circles around the yard. Marcus was there too. He'd brought her, though I never understood why, and I didn't think to ask. Joanna sat near the edge of the yard, and Ellie, 2 years old, sat on a blanket in front of her, playing with a small red toy car, pushing it back and forth across the grass. I walked over, crouched down beside Ellie, and asked, "What kind of car is that?" She held it up proudly for me to see, and laughed. Joanna looked at me just for a second, just long enough that I almost caught it and then looked away. I didn't think anything more of that moment. I should have. If I'd paid closer attention, I might have caught the way she watched me walk back across the yard afterward, the way her expression held something a little longer than a casual glance usually would. But I was still deep in my own recovery back then, still learning how to be a single person again after years of being half of something else, and I wasn't in any state to notice anyone watching me at all. 18 months ago, on a Wednesday morning, I was sitting at that same sidewalk coffee shop on Larimer Street, reading an old newspaper someone had left folded on the next table, something I did whenever I didn't feel like looking at my phone. Joanna walked in. No, Ellie this time. She mentioned a babysitter had her for the morning. She spotted me first, paused for just a beat, then walked over and pulled out the chair across from me without waiting to be asked. "Nathan, it's been a while." I told her to sit. She was already sitting. We ended up talking for 40 minutes straight, about Denver, about the way the light changes once fall really sets in, about the garage and a stubborn old Pontiac whose owner kept insisting nothing was wrong with it, even though the engine clearly disagreed. Joanna laughed at that, not a polite laugh, not the kind people give you out of habit, but the kind that comes out of someone who genuinely finds something funny. I realized, somewhere in the middle of that 40 minutes, that it was the first time I'd ever actually heard her laugh. Before she got up to leave, she looked down at my cup, where the foam had settled into a small leaf shape the machine drew on its own. Some default pattern I'd never once paid attention to. "Did you draw that leaf yourself?" she asked. I shook my head. "The machine does that, not me." She looked at the cup a moment longer, like it was worth considering. "But you're the one who picked that machine." Then she stood, slung her bag over one shoulder, and walked out into the morning without looking back. I sat there a long while, watching the door she'd walked through. I couldn't explain, even to myself, why that one small sentence stayed lodged in my head for the rest of the day. It followed me back to the garage, sat with me under the hood of a car I was supposed to be focused on, and I found myself thinking about it again that night while I was closing up the espresso machine, wiping down a counter that didn't need wiping. There was something about the way she'd said it, not a compliment exactly, not quite an observation either, just a plain, quiet fact that she'd handed to me like it was nothing, and then walked away before I could ask her what she meant by it. I wasn't used to people paying that kind of attention to the small choices I made. Cassandra never had, not toward the end. She'd noticed the big things, the things that affected her directly, but never the small ones, never the shape of a foam leaf on a cup of coffee nobody else would think twice about. 2 weeks later I ran into her again at that same shop, this time with Ellie riding along in a stroller, kicking her feet against the footrest. Joanna mentioned, almost in passing, that she liked to stop by the farmer's market that set up nearby on weekends. I nodded. It made sense. It was a perfectly reasonable thing to say, except the farmer's market only ran on Saturdays. And somehow Joanna kept showing up on Wednesdays, on Thursdays, sometimes on Fridays too, blocks away from any market at all. I didn't notice that detail, not then. I was too busy noticing other things, the way she always seemed to already know what I'd order, the way Ellie had started reaching for me before Joanna even finished parking the stroller. Ellie handed me a half-eaten cracker from her stroller tray one of those mornings, holding it out with the total confidence of someone who assumed I'd obviously want it. Joanna started to apologize. "Ellie, no, Sorry. She does this with, but I'd already taken it and eaten it without thinking twice. Joanna stopped mid-sentence. Ellie beamed like she'd just successfully completed a very important negotiation, and Joanna looked at me in a way I couldn't quite name yet, before glancing away fast, like she'd caught herself doing something she hadn't meant to do. My neighbor, a woman named Delphine Marsh, was 60 years old and spent most mornings on her second-floor balcony like an unpaid gatekeeper for the entire block, missing nothing. One day she knocked on my door just to tell me, "That blonde girl's back again. She spends an awful lot of time looking toward your garage, you know." I laughed it off. "You're reading too much into it, Delphine." She gave me the look of someone who already knew she was right and had no interest in arguing the point, then turned and went back inside, satisfied. I didn't notice. You probably did. Looking back now, I think about how many small signs I let pass right through me without stopping to ask what they meant. The extra trips to a market that wasn't even open. The way Joanna's eyes tracked the garage door whenever we walked past it, even on days we weren't stopping in. The way she always seemed to already be walking in my direction before I'd even decided to head that way myself. None of it registered as anything more than coincidence. Because I wasn't looking for a pattern. I wasn't looking for anything at all, which is probably exactly why I didn't see it. Over the weeks that followed, Ellie started reacting differently whenever she saw me coming. No more of that wary, unfamiliar stare kids give strangers now. She'd point straight at me and launch into some private 2-year-old language, all urgency and half-words, that Joanna translated as, "She's telling you about a pigeon she saw earlier." It was apparently very impressive. I nodded along seriously, like I was receiving an important field report that deserved my full attention. Joanna covered her mouth to hide a laugh, and failed. I started catching myself looking forward to Saturday mornings days in advance. The way you look forward to something you haven't let yourself name yet. I didn't ask myself why. I just kept showing up, week after week, without examining it too closely. 12 months ago, on a Saturday morning, Joanna and I were standing outside a small flower shop near the coffee place Ellie, pointing insistently at a pot of pink flowers, demanding flower at a volume that drew smiles from passers-by while Joanna dug through her wallet to pay, and I held Ellie on my hip, bouncing her gently to keep her from squirming free. I don't know what I was thinking in that exact moment, or maybe I wasn't thinking at all. Maybe it just came out on its own. I said, "Hey, Joanna, what if we tried dating, just for fun?" Joanna went quiet. Not an awkward quiet, not the kind that makes you want to take a sentence back. A longer pause than it should have been for a joke, like she was weighing something she'd already been weighing for a long time before I ever gave her the opening. Then she turned to look at me and smiled. "Sure. Why not, but just as a joke, okay?" I agreed. I figured she wasn't being serious, that this was just a light-hearted thing two friends said to each other without meaning much by it. She'd been serious long before that sentence ever left my mouth. After that, we started meeting on purpose more. Not by accident. Not because a farmer's market schedule happened to line up morning coffee. Weekend markets, sometimes just walking down the street with Ellie's stroller rolling between us like a small, wheeled chaperone. Joanna always remembered I took my latte with no sugar, never had to ask twice. She never checked her phone once, not the whole time we sat together. She asked about my work in a way that wasn't polite small talk at all. She actually wanted to picture the garage in her head, wanted to know if that old Pontiac ever finally ran right, wanted to know if Terrence still told that story from 1987 about the truck he restored by hand. I started to feel something underneath all of it, something I couldn't quite put a name to, but I kept telling myself, she's Marcus's ex-wife, my closest friend from college. That has to mean something, even if I wasn't sure exactly what it meant or why it mattered as much as it seemed to. I kept showing up. I kept not asking myself why. Some mornings, walking to the garage, I'd catch myself already picturing what Saturday would look like. Ellie's stroller wheel that always squeaked on the same crack in the sidewalk, Joanna's hands wrapped around her cup exactly the way she held it every single time, the particular sound of her laugh when something actually caught her off guard. I didn't examine any of it. I just let myself look forward to it, the same simple way you look forward to good weather, without asking what it might mean that you were counting the days. There's a particular kind of comfort in not asking the obvious question, in letting something good simply exist, without examining it too closely for fear it might not hold up under the weight of a real answer. I told myself I was just being a decent friend to Marcus's ex-wife, helping out where I could, letting a 2-year-old steal crackers from my hand because it made her laugh. I didn't let myself think much further than that, not out loud, not even in the privacy of my own head. Some part of me must have known that thinking too hard about it would force me to name something I wasn't ready to name yet. 9 months ago, Marcus called me for the first time in months, out of nowhere, on a weekday evening when I wasn't expecting to hear from him at all. His voice sounded ordinary at first, checking in, talking about nothing in particular. Work, weather, some game he'd watched, and then he got to the point, the way people do when they've been building up to something the whole call. I hear you've been seeing a lot of Joanna. Longer than I expected. You know, she's had her eye on you since that barbecue, right? I saw it happen. Didn't say anything because I figured it wasn't my business to say. I asked him what exactly he was trying to tell me. His tone shifted into something I didn't fully trust, something careful in a way that felt rehearsed. I just want you to know Joanna's complicated, Nathan. She's got her reasons for coming around. I hung up, sat there for 15 minutes without moving, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing in particular. I couldn't tell if Marcus was genuinely trying to protect me, or trying to protect himself from me, eventually finding out the real reason his marriage had fallen apart in the first place. But that comment planted a small thorn under my skin, and without fully meaning to, I started pulling back from Joanna. Nothing obvious, nothing I could have explained if she'd asked, just fewer texts, fewer times I was the one suggesting we meet up. She noticed, I could tell she noticed, the way her messages got a little shorter, a little more careful, but she never once asked me why. Looking back, I think that silence cost us both more than either of us realized at the time. I could have just told her what Marcus said. She could have just asked what had changed. Instead, we both did the thing people do when they're scared of an answer. We let the space between us grow a little wider every week, told ourselves it wasn't really happening, and kept meeting anyway out of habit, even as the habit itself started to feel thinner than it used to. 7 months ago, Cassandra called. Her voice had that particular sweetness I'd learned to recognize after 4 years of marriage to her. The tone she used right before asking for something. She said she wanted to talk, like adults, her words exactly. I agreed to meet her once, at a neutral restaurant neither of us had any history with. She'd remarried by then. I'd seen it on social media months earlier and hadn't thought much of it. I genuinely didn't understand what she could possibly want from me now. The meeting itself was unremarkable on the surface. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. She asked if I was seeing anyone. I didn't answer directly, kept it vague. She smiled at that, the kind of smile I recognized as her calculating something behind it, then changed the subject entirely, moved on to something about her new house. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong a second time, and I wouldn't understand how wrong for another month. Looking back, I should have recognized that smile for what it was. Cassandra never smiled like that unless she already had a next move planned out, 3 steps ahead of whatever conversation we were actually having. I'd seen that exact expression before, years earlier, right before she'd announced some decision she'd already made without me. I just hadn't seen it in a while, and I'd let myself forget what it meant. 6 months ago. An ordinary Saturday morning, nothing about it different from any other. I'd just come off an early shift at the garage, walking down Larimer Street with grease still on my hands and a dark streak down one shoulder of my shirt. Joanna called me over from a table outside. She was there with Ellie, her latte still steaming in front of her. I pulled up a chair, sat down without thinking twice about it. Ellie climbed straight into my lap, wrapped her arms around my neck, and started telling me the pigeon story again, more elaborate this time. Then Cassandra showed up. She hadn't come by accident. I knew that the instant I saw the way she walked in dressed up, heels clicking against the pavement, the kind of composed confidence that only comes from real preparation. She pulled out the empty chair at our table like she'd been invited all along, sat down, and looked straight at Joanna, ignoring me entirely. "I don't have much time, so I'll just say it. I think you should know Nathan never wanted kids. That's why our marriage ended. I wanted a family. He didn't. You've got a little girl sitting right there on his lap. Are you sure he's here for you, or is this just the most convenient thing he could find right now?" Joanna said nothing. Her hand slowly rose to cover her mouth. I looked at Cassandra. Cass, she was already standing. "I just thought you deserved the truth." Then she turned and walked off down the sidewalk, leaving the three of us sitting there at that table, me, Joanna, and Ellie, still wrapped happily around my neck, completely unaware that anything at all had just happened. Joanna looked at me. Not angry, not accusing, just a question she wasn't ready to say out loud, yet the look of someone who'd just heard something and didn't know whether it was true, but wasn't brave enough to ask directly, not right there, not with Ellie between us. I opened my mouth to say something. Joanna shook her head, barely. Not now. She stood, lifted Ellie onto her hip in one practiced motion, grabbed her bag off the back of the chair. "I need to go." I called that afternoon. No answer. I called again that evening, told myself it wasn't too many times, though I already knew it probably was. I texted that night. She read it. I could see the read receipt sitting there, unanswered, but she never wrote back. Every morning after that, I sat alone at that small table in my apartment, made my latte the same way I always had, and stared at the little leaf shape in the foam. Still there, unchanged, and for the first time I understood exactly how used I'd gotten to having someone sitting across from me at that table. Not Cassandra. It had never really been about Cassandra again, not for a long time. It was Joanna. It had been Joanna for longer than I'd let myself admit, and the silence, sitting where she used to be, told me that more clearly than any conversation could have. I found myself replaying that morning on a loop, Cassandra's words, the look on Joanna's face, the exact second her hand came up to cover her mouth, trying to find some version of it where I'd said the right thing fast enough to stop what happened. There wasn't one. All I had was the after, the empty chair across from me every morning, and a question I didn't know how to ask her without making everything worse. It was Joanna. 4 months ago, I called Cassandra and told her I needed to see her one last time. She came, right on time, dressed down this time. None of the polish from that morning at the coffee shop. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Why? Cassandra was quiet for a long moment, the first time I could remember ever seeing her without a ready answer sitting right on her tongue. Then she said, slowly, like it cost her something, "I heard about you and her, and I don't know why it bothered me the way it did. I've remarried. I have my own life now, my own house, my own everything. But I kept thinking, you didn't want kids with me, and now you're ready to jump in with a woman who already has someone else's child. I don't want you back, Nathan. I want to be clear about that, but I didn't want you to have the thing we never managed to have, either." That was the most honest thing Cassandra had ever said to me in all the years I'd known her. It didn't excuse what she'd done, and I told her as much. But there was something almost sad about hearing her finally say the real thing after years of never quite getting there, like watching someone put down a weight they'd been carrying around so long they'd forgotten it was optional. I sat there and let her finish completely. Didn't interrupt once. Then I said, "I didn't want kids with you because our marriage was already empty long before either of us was willing to admit it out loud. Those are two very different things, and you know it. And what you said to Joanna, in front of Ellie, that wasn't yours to say. You didn't have the right." I stood up. "I hope things go well for you. genuinely. But this is the last time we ever talk. I walked out of that restaurant, didn't look back once. That night I texted Joanna. I need to talk to you. Not to defend myself. Just the truth, whether you want to hear it or not, is entirely up to you. 6 long hours passed before she wrote back. That coffee shop. Saturday, 9 in the morning. I read that message 3 times before I put the phone down, then picked it back up and read it a 4th time, just to make sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing out of pure wanting. I barely slept that night, running through every possible version of what I needed to say, none of them sounding right, no matter how many times I rearranged the words in my head. I got there 15 minutes early, ordered 2 lattes before she'd even arrived. Set one across the table, in the seat where Joanna would sit if she came. I sat there staring at it while I waited, running through everything I wanted to say and finding I still didn't know where to start. Joanna arrived right at 9, exactly on time. No Ellie with her this time. She looked at the latte sitting across the table from me, looked at it for a long moment, like she was reading something into it, then sat down without a word. She didn't say anything first, she just waited for me to start. I told her I didn't want kids with Cassandra because our marriage was already over long before we ever signed anything official. I'm not someone who doesn't want a family, Joanna. I'm someone who didn't want to keep pretending something hollow was still working. Those are 2 completely different things, and I don't know why I've never said that out loud to anyone before now. Maybe because nobody ever asked me the right question. Joanna watched me the whole time, didn't interrupt once. I kept going. And with you, I'm not here because it's convenient, or easy, or because you were simply available. I'm here because every time Ellie hands me one of those half-eaten crackers like it's the most natural thing in the world, I don't feel like I have to be anything other than exactly who I am. I just feel like I want to be someone worth trusting. And you, somehow, you make me want to actually be that person. There was a long silence between us. Then Joanna finally spoke. She told me she hadn't really been coming to my neighborhood for the farmer's market at all, not the whole time. The market only ran on Saturdays, after all, and she'd been showing up on Wednesdays, on Thursdays, on Fridays too, on days that had nothing to do with any market. She'd been coming, she said, because after that barbecue all those months ago, she'd gone home and simply couldn't shake the image of the one person there who'd actually crouched down to Ellie's level and asked what kind of car that was, instead of just being politely, distantly kind to her mother. I'd been quietly in love with you since then, Nathan. The farmer's market was just the excuse I needed so I wouldn't feel like I was doing something completely irrational. I figured that even if you never noticed, at least I'd still get to sit across the table from you sometimes. We looked at each other across that table for a long moment, for the first time in a long time, with nothing left standing between us. No excuses, no half-truths, no kiss, no grand declaration. None of that was needed. I just slid the latte a little further toward her side of the table, and Joanna wrapped both hands around the cup like she was holding on to something warm on a cold day. The morning sun fell flat and steady across the table between us. This time, nobody came to interrupt it. We sat there long after both cups had gone lukewarm, not saying much of anything else, because there wasn't really anything else that needed saying. Every hard sentence that needed saying had already been spoken between us. What was left was just the 2 of us, and the quiet, and the particular kind of relief that comes after finally setting something heavy down in front of another person and having them pick it up gently instead of walking away. We didn't rush anything after that, not even a little. I didn't put a name on whatever was actually happening between us in those first few weeks. We just kept meeting the way we always had, kept doing morning coffee, kept doing the weekend market with Ellie tagging along between us. But there was no fake excuse needed anymore, no cover story required, no pretending either of us had somewhere else to be. For the first time, Joanna asked me outright, without any pretense at all, "Are you free this Saturday? Not do you usually go to that coffee place around now?" The way she'd always phrased it before. I told her I was free. She smiled at that, A real smile. The kind she didn't seem to be hiding anymore. Ellie clapped for no particular reason at all, just because clapping seemed like the right thing to do whenever her mother smiled that way. I started noticing small things about Joanna I'd somehow never noticed before, even after all those months. She tilted her head to the left whenever she was thinking something through carefully. She never once touched her phone during meals, even when Ellie was being loud and difficult, and everyone else at a nearby table would have reached for a screen out of pure habit. She said, actually right before she said what she really meant, like she needed a small bridge to cross between simple politeness and full honesty. I started waiting for those actually moments, looking forward to them the way you look forward to the truth. It occurred to me, somewhere in those first slow weeks, that I'd spent years with Cassandra without ever once noticing a habit of hers the way I was suddenly noticing every small thing about Joanna. That difference told me something I didn't need spelled out any further. A month later, Joanna asked me to fix a sticking door hinge at her place, right in my old wheelhouse from years back, even though these days I spend most of my time under the hoods of cars instead of working on houses. I went over on a Sunday afternoon. Ellie sat on the living room floor the whole time, watching me work, her head tilted straight up, eyes tracking every single move of my hands. She didn't say a word the entire time, just watched with the serious, focused face of someone quietly learning a trade she intended to master. When I finally finished, Ellie got up without a word, walked into another room, and came back a minute later holding a little yellow plastic cup, the one she used for pretend coffee with her mother most mornings. She walked straight over and held it out to me, no hesitation at all. Joanna stood leaning against the doorframe behind her, real coffee cup cradled in both hands, watching the two of us with a look I couldn't find a better word for than full, completely full, like something in her had settled into place. I took the toy cup from Ellie and pretended to take a long, careful sip. Ellie clapped both hands together and laughed like I'd just accomplished something genuinely remarkable, something worth celebrating properly. 5 weeks ago, Saturday morning. That same sidewalk coffee shop on Larimer Street, that same exact table we always seemed to end up at. I was walking by after an early shift at the garage, grease still on my hands, a dark streak still on my shoulder from the day's work. Joanna called out from the table outside, the way she always did. "Nathan, come sit down." I pulled up a chair like I had so many times before. Ellie was playing with a few small puzzle pieces scattered across the table. I helped her pick one up after it slipped and fell to the ground, and handed it back to her carefully. She took it from me, then looked up, straight at me. Calm, completely natural. Not a second of hesitation anywhere in her expression. And she said, "Clearly, Daddy, that was it. Just that." Then she went right back to her puzzle pieces like absolutely nothing had happened at all, like the word hadn't just rearranged everything. Joanna didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. We looked at each other across that table, and this time, for the first time, neither of us needed to say anything else out loud. There was no question left hanging in the air between us. No answer left to explain or defend. Just the morning sun, the latte cooling slightly between us, and a 2-year-old who'd just told the truth more clearly and more completely than either of us had ever managed to. A few weeks after that, Marcus called me one last time. He wanted to explain something, wanted to talk through whatever he thought needed talking through. I didn't give him the chance to even get started. I said, simply, "I hope everything goes well for you, Marcus." Then I hung up, and I meant it, without any bitterness attached to it at all. No anger in me, no lingering regret. Just the plain feeling of a man who'd finally set down something he hadn't realized had been weighing on him for so long. Cassandra officially remarried. Not long after that I saw the announcement on social media. The photos, the whole thing. I looked at it for a moment and felt the only thing I actually wanted to feel. Quiet, relief, for both of us, for two people who'd finally found their own separate versions of settled. Time has a strange way of moving once you stop bracing yourself for the next thing to go wrong. Ellie's almost 3 years old now. She still calls me daddy, naturally, consistently, like there was never any other version of things, like the word had simply always belonged to me. Joanna never corrects her, not once. I never correct her either. I still make coffee every single morning, but not alone anymore. Not for a long time now. The old espresso machine I carried out of my previous life now makes coffee for 3 people every morning. A big cup for me, a smaller one for Joanna, and Ellie sitting up tall in her high chair with her little yellow plastic cup, waiting patiently for her turn at pretend coffee before the real day gets started around her. Some mornings Ellie insists on pouring for everyone herself. Standing on a step stool, Joanna keeps by the counter just for that purpose, tipping an empty plastic pot over each cup with enormous ceremony before anyone's allowed to drink. Nobody ever minds waiting for it. It's become, without either of us planning it that way, the best part of most mornings, the 3 of us standing around a kitchen that used to belong to just one person, now belonging fully to all 3 of us instead. 3 chairs pulled up to one table. I honestly couldn't tell you the exact moment I started thinking about it that way, that this particular table needed one more chair permanently. Probably long before I ever let myself admit it out loud, even to myself. Maybe it started the very first Saturday she called me over to a table I hadn't planned on stopping at. Maybe it started even earlier than that, back at a barbecue where a 2-year-old held up a little red car and I crouched down without thinking twice about it. Either way, by the time I finally noticed, it had already become the truest thing in my life. I used to think love was something you went out and searched for. You set a goal, you put in the effort, you make a decision, and there it is. It turns out that wasn't true for me. It was something I didn't even notice happening until one ordinary Saturday morning, when a little girl looked up from her puzzle pieces and called me by a name I never once thought I'd earned the right to hear. Cassandra tried to use the truth as a weapon that morning at that same table, but the truth was never really a weapon, it's just the truth, waiting to be understood. In the end, it walked me straight to the place I needed to be, in a way I never would have found on my own without that blow landing first. Marcus tried to plant doubt in me about Joanna, about why she was really there. But by then, I'd already watched her sit alone at that coffee shop and go 40 straight minutes without once touching her phone. I'd already watched her lean against a doorframe and quietly watch me drink pretend coffee out of a plastic yellow cup with her daughter, wearing a look that needed no explanation. People who show up for convenience don't look at you like that. Joanna never came to my neighborhood for the farmer's market, not really. She came for me, long before I ever let myself notice it. And I, even though it took losing a fair amount along the way to finally open my eyes, eventually came for her too. Not because I went looking for it, because I finally stopped pretending I couldn't see what had been sitting right in front of me the whole time, waiting patiently for me to catch up. Have you ever realized you were in love with someone long after they'd already fallen in love with you? And if you have, what was it that finally made you see it clearly? Sometimes the truest things in life show up wearing the smallest disguises, a joke you didn't mean, a cup of coffee you almost walked past, a word a 2-year-old wasn't supposed to know yet but said anyway, because somewhere along the way, it had simply become true. Leave your answer down in the comments. I read every single one of them myself. Like this video if you believe that something that starts out as nothing more than a joke can still grow into the realest, most honest thing in your entire life. And subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because the best stories, the truest ones, almost never start out the way any of us would expect them to.